So again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I still feel a little weird. I feel like I'm still just kind of getting acclimated again, you know. I feel a little rusty, so to speak. But the Torah portion, Bishalach. It begins in Exodus 13, beginning in verse 17. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near or closer. For God had said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. And so God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, or Yom Suf, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. And there's a lot in those verses there. A lot of things we've talked about. They came out in orderly ranks, which is to say they came out more or less in a military column. They're not running, panicking. They are marching out of the land of Egypt. Egypt's kind of been devastated and destroyed. And yet God looks upon them and he sees that, well, if I take them the shortcut, the first sign of trouble, these are people that are going to want to turn around and go back into their bondage. And that kind of sets the stage for some of the things that we see in this Torah portion. You know, the kind of people that they still were at that point in time. So I want to hit the pause button and I want to make mention of some of the things that we were singing about this morning. And to me, the common thing was this, that we should not be fearful of our adversary because our God makes a way when there seems to be no way. There is no God like our God, mi chamocha. He's always made a way. This is my confidence. I'm in your hands. You've never failed me yet. If you've never failed me yet, then why would I think that you're going to fail me now? And so I don't need to be fearful of those things because fear typically provokes something in us called complaining. You got relatively quiet there compared to what it was a while ago. Anyway, they're coming out of Egypt with boldness, according to Exodus 14. They're coming out with a high hand. They're coming out with upraised arms. They're going out with banners. They're singing. They're celebrating, just like we were doing just a moment ago. But later on, the celebration, after it subsides, they're going to see some things that they didn't like, and they're going to get fearful, and then that's going to generate complaining. So my admonition to us this morning is don't let the celebration and the proclamations and the praise dissipate and die down when we leave here and have to face the world. We need to carry that with us into the world and not allow the world to, or the pressures of the world to cause us to fear. And so they're coming out with singing and celebration, demonstrating they had no intention of going back to Egypt. And of course, all this while they're leaving a country that has, up until this point, been a superpower, but in just a matter of months, maybe less than a year, this superpower has been devastated. They're mourning the death of their firstborn. And so these people of Israel are marching out free from the bondage of their now defeated adversary. So they're celebrating. They're happy. Yay. God won a victory for us. Our enemy is defeated. Yippee-yay-yay. But it didn't take long. Only after a few days of freedom, there were many in Israel who had a very different outlook compared to when they came out of Egypt to when they got to Yom Suf at the sea, and they realized that Pharaoh was after them. And so, as I've said before, I'm not of the view anyway, that crisis makes the man. I think that crisis reveals the man. When we get squeezed, who and what we are comes out. So, here's what one rabbinical commentator said about these people who came out of Egypt. He said, it was not the sword at their side that was lacking, but the heart underneath that failed. They lacked the spirit of trustfully putting themselves in God's hands under any and all circumstances. And so for all the bravado, when the pressure was on, the crisis was there, we got to see what they were really made out of. God already knew what they were made out of. He already knew what was in their heart, which is why he says, I'm not going to let them go the shortcut, because they're going to see war and they're going to want to turn around. Because really, they didn't really trust him at that point. And he had to take them down a road whereby in the end they would see, at least by the evidence that he presented to them, that they could trust him, that they should trust him. He had already planned to deal with Pharaoh. He had already planned to deal with Pharaoh and his army. You know, Pharaoh thinks that Israel is walking into a trap. But what Pharaoh doesn't realize is God is leading him into a trap, right? He doesn't realize that until it's too late and the wheels are falling off and the waters are returning and his chariots and his army are drowned in the sea. So he sets the trap in Exodus 14, and he's telling Israel to do something that wasn't conventional. Probably seemed like they were taking a detour. But this is when he begins to set the trap. Exodus 14, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they should turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon, and you shall camp before it by the sea. Here's why. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. He's telling them, I'm setting a trap for Pharaoh. And this is what he's going to think. But then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all of his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So one takeaway from this, or one more takeaway from this, is when God acts, he doesn't just want his people to realize that he's the Lord and that there's none like him. He wants his enemies to know there are none like him in the earth, right? He wants the Egyptians to know that I am the Lord. And it was a pretty dramatic event that brought them to that conclusion, but in the end, they know. In fact, what does it say when they're going into the midst of the sea and they see all these things happening? They turn to Pharaoh and says, the Lord is fighting for Israel. Let's get out of here. All right. Pi-hahiroth, it means the mouth of the gorges. This is the place they were to camp. So mouth of the gorges suggests in that part of the world that what he had them do was, as they're coming out of Egypt, they turned and went down into a wadi, a dry riverbed. And over in that part of the world, some of these wadis, the canyon walls are very high. I don't know, how many of you have been to Qumran in Israel before? If you've been to Qumran, you're at the mouth of a wadi. And you have these tall mountains, they seem. But those wadis will fill up with water. Well, apparently this is what he has them walk through. In fact, there is a place, I'm not going to get into all this, that actually fits the bill for where Israel would have went, where he would have had them camp on the shore of the Red Sea. But my point here is they're taking this, what seems to be a detour, but God is setting a trap. And he's having 2 to 3 million people turn and go down to this gorge, which is going to be, in my view anyway, kind of a narrow passageway. It's going to kind of put them in a squeeze, which sounds like that one and only way that leads to life. It's troublesome, right? It's straight, it's narrow, and it causes us to be squeezed. And why? To see what's in there. To see what's in there. God will allow crises to touch our lives, to squeeze us, to see what's on the inside. And sometimes, if you're like me, I have found that what's on the inside, I don't like it. Some of it is I thought I had dealt with that. I didn't realize that was still there. I didn't realize that was there. Those kinds of things. Now I know some of you, when you're squeezed, a halo pops up on top of your head. So they come through the wadi, they come through this gorge, to the mouth of it, Pi-hahiroth, to discover that they are there on the seashore. And the pressure now is going to mount when they realize that Pharaoh is pursuing them with all of these chariots. And their retreat has been cut off. They're pinned in. There's nowhere to go. And so if you are of a carnal mind, a secular mind, you would assume that God has led them into a death trap. That's certainly what Pharaoh thought. And they're, from that point of view, they're trapped. But they weren't. I probably would not have chosen that path. It doesn't seem that Moses even was someone to choose that path. It's that God told them to go this way. It's more likely that you and I would have chosen a path that seems familiar. I know the way. Everybody else is doing it too. This seems to be the right way, but that's the wide, broad path, and that leads to destruction. And so again, God led them in this scenario down the only path that led to life, even though at the time anyway, they could not realize that. They didn't realize that until after the fact. And so when they find themselves at the mouth of the gorge, they're at the seaside, they're cut off, Pharaoh's chariots are pursuing them from behind, what did they do? They did what they do best. Complained. They excelled at complaining. Exodus 14, verse 11 and 12. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt so with us, to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. So, although they don't know it, the moment of deliverance is at hand, but what are they doing? They're complaining. And what do you think prompted that complaint? Fear. Not fear of God, but fear of man, fear of the circumstances. Because there are many among them who are not willing to believe God. They would much rather complain. And this is in spite of all the things they've witnessed. All those plagues that were poured out upon Egypt, plagues that touched Egypt but didn't touch them. And why? Because God set a division between them and between Egypt. They witnessed that. They saw it. They didn't hear stories about it. They lived it. And yet, at the first sign of trouble, remember just a few days, they were, hallelujah, praise the Lord, sounding shofars, waving banners, dancing, singing, celebrating. A few days later, we told you to leave us alone. Just leave us alone where we were. We'll serve Pharaoh. We'll just die this way. It would have been better if we'd done that than to end up like this. That was their attitude. But in spite of what I would regard as an irresponsible and ungrateful attitude, notice how God responds. Verse 19. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all night. And so, in other words, in response to their complaining, why didn't you leave us alone? Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt to die? God didn't do that. He protected them. He cast Pharaoh into darkness, and at the same time, he provided light to them so that they could proceed. Of course, I'm sure that there was some thinking, where are we going to go? In fact, it seems to me that Moses was a little bit in the dark about it, because there's a place in the Torah portion that after Moses is talking all big and bad to the people, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, and keep your mouth shut, by the way. He put it a little nicer, and you shall hold your peace. I like to think he was telling them, shut up. But then apparently he turns around and has a conversation with God. Hey, what are we going to do? Because God says, why are you speaking to me? Tell the people to go forward. Raise your rod. You know the story. So with a blast from his nostrils, he parted the sea. They walked through on dry land. Egypt pursues. Egypt is destroyed. The waters close back over them, and the people of Israel are on the other side, seeing the dead Egyptians being washed onto the shoreline. And what did they do? Celebrated. Hallelujah, blowing shofars, banners, all those things, singing and dancing. The women are breaking out the tambourines. Don't get any ideas. Anyway, they're breaking out the tambourines, and they're singing, and they're dancing, and everybody's having a good time. Exodus 15. Verse 1, then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord and spoke, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. They're singing, they're celebrating, they're dancing, they're worshiping, they're having a great time. They just feel this exaltation. That's what I meant to say. All right? But that was on that day. 3 days later, verse 22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. They went into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days, into the wilderness and found no water. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained, because that's what they're really good at. They complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And so he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. So we won't expound too much on that. We got into that a little bit on Wednesday night. But what we do want to emphasize is they're complaining. Again, now there's nothing wrong with wanting water. In fact, we need water. Have to have water to live. But somehow or another, I'm fairly confident that the creator of the universe was well aware that which he created needs water. He's not, this hasn't slipped his mind. He knows that. He created us that way. But we're starting to see a pattern developing in this Torah portion. They're going to rejoice and celebrate and sing and dance and blow horns and wave flags when everything's going great and the enemy's defeated before their face. But as soon as something goes wrong, at the first sign of trouble, what do? Very quick to complain, aren't they? And so it says that at Marah, he was putting them to the test. Verse 25. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them and said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Now, it seems that this statement has a lot to do with the fact that there are bitter waters. He finds a tree, throws the tree in, the waters are made sweet so that they can drink. And there, like I said, there are things that we can glean from that. But I also want us to see this. He's making a statement here, and that is, I am your source for everything. Trust me. Trust me because I am your source for everything. And this is happening, remember, just 3 days after he had made a way where there seemed to be no way. And yet 3 days later, what are they doing? Complaining. So he's testing them. The crisis is revealing the man, revealing the woman, and we see what comes out, and he demonstrates, I can be trusted. I just led you through a sea. Don't you think that I can give you water to drink in the wilderness? Why are you so quick to complain? And so if you'll remember and do what I said to do, you'll find that I can be trusted, I should be trusted, I'm your source for everything. And if you trust me, if you walk in obedience, you're not going to suffer the way the Egyptians suffered. But what is the remez there? What is the hint there? What does that fact imply? What if you don't trust me? What if you don't obey me? What if you fear others more than you fear me? Would it not suggest that those things that they were spared from when they were walking in obedience, they may not be spared from? In other words, if you're going to act like the Egyptians, you're going to have to deal with the consequences the Egyptians deal with. It doesn't say that. It just seems to imply it to me. And by the way, immediately after this, where did he take them? To Elim. There were 12 wells, 70 palm trees. In other words, what was he demonstrating? I can take care of you. I know where all the spots are. I know what I'm doing. But let's see what happened after that. Exodus 16, verse 1. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Zin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel, there's that word again, complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Oh, if we could only stayed in Egypt and ate what Pharaoh said we could eat, we would have been a lot better off. It's almost as if they're saying that the guy who had put them in bondage and who had oppressed them, it's almost like they're saying that guy took better care of us than the God of Israel is doing. That seems to be the accusation. Doing a better job than the one who delivered us from our bondage. And this is 1 month after they have seen the destruction of Egypt and the death of the firstborn and their deliverance. So again, it seems to me that God's people they really excel at complaining. Now that was just them. That was a long time ago, Bill. It's odd that people who were enslaved and whose lives were controlled by others, it's odd to me that they would be doing this because they're starting to come across as people who feel entitled. Does it seem that way to you, Jerry? Can you see that? They're starting to sound like people who feel like they're entitled. And if things don't go just the way they think they should go, they're going to start whining and complaining and bellyaching. It's starting to remind me of society today. People who think anything their hearts desire, it should just be there. They're entitled to it. There are people who think that they are entitled to free education. And I say that because they take out student loans and run up a big debt, and then when they can't pay it, they say, well, I'm entitled for the government to come in and just pardon this. There are people who feel they are entitled to free health care, or, well, not exactly free. Get somebody else to pay for it, but I don't want to. That kind of a thing. There are people... Do you know that there are people who are not from this country, who come to this country, and who have turned up their nose at what the country provided for them, saying, no, we don't want that, we want something better? I'm not making that up. That is the mentality of a lot of people in this nation and throughout the world today. And it seems to me the more we go along, the worse it gets. But that's talking about the world, Bill. Yeah, those people in the world, they're just ungrateful brats. Thankfully, we're not like that at all. So these people are complaining again, and what does God do to address their complaint? He gives them what they need to live. Exodus 16, verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. I want to just underscore that, circle it, highlight it. You know what? When we go around complaining, and I'm talking about me too, and we think nobody's listening, guess what? He hears. He hears our complaints. He hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we, Moses asks, that you should complain against us? Also Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the morning, or in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. And so the people are, they're focusing on Moses, they're focusing on Aaron, they're focusing on those people, and they're complaining to them and about them, but Moses says, you're not really complaining about me. You're complaining about the Lord, you just don't have the guts to address him directly. That's Bill's translation of what he's saying here. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Now it came to pass as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Do you think he's trying to get across the point here? How many times has he already said, I have heard their complaints? The Lord heard your complaints. It seems he's wanting to make it very clear to us that when we're belly aching, he hears it. I don't think that's a good thing. Anyway, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. All right, so let's affirm something here. Every person, every family, every community, we have certain basic needs. We need bread to eat. We need water to drink. There are these things that God knows that we need. The Messiah acknowledged that. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. He is well aware of what we need. But perhaps, and I'm speaking to me too, perhaps you and I should learn to ask him for what we need instead of complaining about what we need. Because if we ask him for bread, he won't give us a stone. If we ask him for a fish, he won't give us a serpent. Because he's far greater in goodness and loving kindness than we are as people. So maybe we should learn to ask for what we need instead of complaining about what we don't have. And then there's the issue of complaining, not about what we need, but about what we want. Those things we don't necessarily need, but the things that we want. I might get in trouble here, but let's see, over the last several years, let's just say this area, this region of the country, and others, have seen a great influx of people from other areas in the country. We'll just put it that way, all right? And those of us, that grew up around in this area, we always love it when somebody comes from New York and says, well, back in New York, we do it this way. And then what do we say? We go back to New York. Well, in California, we have this. Well, we don't have that here. So if you want this, you might want to think about going to California. Now, I know we got a lot of Californians here. And I am picking on you just a little bit. But I was thinking about you right there, you. All right, anyway. But let's just springboard off of that to say this. At our last congregation, we did it this way. In our last congregation, we had that. We didn't do that. We did this. Well, ... All right? So now I want you to see, the people they see themselves as complaining to and about Moses, complaining to Aaron about Aaron, but God didn't see it that way at all. He saw it that they were complaining against him. And not only that, even as he's providing for all of their needs, giving them manna every morning, 6 out of 7 days. What are they doing? There are some of them who, even then, they refuse to honor his rules. Here's what he said concerning the manna. Let no one leave any of it until morning. Here's what some of them said. Oh yeah, I'll do what I want to do. And they ended up with worms. No. He said, gather it for 6 days, but on Shabbat, you don't gather it. There's not going to be any there. But some of them said, well, I'm going to go look for it anyway. It reminds, all right, this reminds me of those people when they see that yellow tape that says, do not cross. There's just something that comes over them and says, well, watch this. All right. I could kind of go from there to people who are following their GPS right off a cliff. It has happened, Mary. I'm not exaggerating that. Obstinance and the inclination to complain out of our own selfishness is not a good representation of the one that we claim to serve. That does not represent him well. He was long-suffering. He was selfless. He was always considerate of others. That doesn't mean he was always, patting them on the head, everything's going to be okay. But he was considerate, and he was very long-suffering. I'm not sure that we can say that for everybody in Moses' congregation. So we go from that, and the next thing we read about is surprise. They're complaining again. Exodus 17. Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses. So they're ramping it up a little bit now. They're not just complaining, they're contending. They're getting in his face and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And so Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? And why do you tempt the Lord?" And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why is it that you have brought us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" They've already forgotten what happened at Marah. They didn't have anything to drink. It was bitter water. He made it sweet so that they could drink. And then immediately took them to a place where there were 12 wells and 70 palm trees. But they've already forgotten that. They have forgotten about the manna that shows up 6 days out of 7 in the morning. They can go out and they can get everything they need. They can gather their daily bread, and all they have to do is go pick it up. They've forgotten about the quail that he provided for them. There's all kinds of miraculous events that God has already done, kind of in sync with what we were singing earlier. You've never failed me yet. There is a reason that he takes us through these things, demonstrates that he can and should be trusted, because there's going to be another test later on. There's not going to be another crisis to see what kind of man, what kind of a woman we are. So there are all of these things that they should have called upon to strengthen their confidence and their faith, but somehow or another it didn't take. So it doesn't surprise me that the next thing we read about in the Torah portion is they're attacked by Amalek. And who specifically is attacked by Amalek? The weak and those who are straggling behind. Those are the ones who were exposed, and those are the ones who were attacked. Now, Israel ultimately prevailed over Amalek. You've got Aaron and Hur holding Moses' arms up so that Israel can prevail, and they did, and God declares war against Amalek, blot his name out from under the heavens. But that didn't do anything for those who had already perished. They were gone. So all of this reminds me of some things that Paul had to say to the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And this is where it's going to get personal. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Messiah. But with most of them, God was not well pleased. That is one of the greatest understatements in all of Scripture, as far as I'm concerned. But with most of them, God was not well pleased. How many that left Egypt went into the land? 2. It seems to me that the great majority of them did not please God, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And this is not talking about the world now. This is talking about his people. But here is the point. Paul says these things became our examples to the intent, for the purpose that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. What is that referring to? The golden calf, right? It's referring to the golden calf. And so what happened there at the foot of Mount Sinai where the golden calf is concerned? Moses didn't come back when they thought he should. He did not meet their expectations. And as soon as things aren't happening how they think they should, They're going to put God in a box. We need something that's familiar to us. We need something that we can understand. This, invisible God that Moses talks to and gives us all these instructions and commands, we need something that we understand that makes sense to us. And so we're going to fashion what we were familiar with back in Egypt. We're going to have it represent him, but we need something that we can touch, feel, see, measure, understand, contemplate, and they let their emotions overwhelm what they knew to be true. Fear, doubt, insecurity, and they've already forgotten what they told God. Whatever the Lord says, we will hear and do. But it wasn't in their heart. And he even tells Moses that in Deuteronomy 5. Oh, that it was in their heart to obey me and keep my commands, that all would be well with them and with their children forever. So we need to be very careful about when things aren't going the way we think they should, happening when we think they should, how we think they should. And everybody in this room and out there, to some degree, has been guilty of that. Have we not? We want God to do it in a way that makes sense to us. They put or tried to put God in a box. They let their emotions, some of it fear, overwhelm them. He goes on, verse 8. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Does anybody know what that's referring to? Baal Peor. What is the sin of Baal Peor? Well, there was these daughters of Midian, good-looking women, probably talked very soft and sweet. And they said, why don't you come have a meal with us? So, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. What's the harm in having a meal? We'll just go sit down at the table, have a meal, and they're talking all soft and sweet to them. They start eating their bread, start eating a meal with them. But before you know it, they're not only digesting their food, but they're ingesting their words, and they're embracing the spirit that's behind all of that. And before you know it, these people have bowed down to their rebellion and their idolatry. That's principally what the sin of Baal Peor is about. Yes, he says sexual immorality, but what that union was more than just physical. It was much bigger than that. They were joining themselves to this rebellious, idolatrous attitude. And so I'm going to say this, and I probably will get in trouble with some. But if we are willing to put our feet under the table of rebels and share a meal with them, I'm not talking about, somebody who doesn't know any better. I'm talking about people who are walking in unrepentant sin, people who are demonstrating fruits of rebellion, and we're willing to put our feet under their table and eat a meal with them and be seduced by that spirit and what they're involved with, we run the risk of eventually being seduced by that. Well, they keep Shabbat, they wear tzitzit. Really? Well, they just talk so nice. They seem so nice and so sweet. It's just so seductive. If we're not careful, we will end up bowing down to their rebellion. And if you want to convince yourself this is okay, then you need to be okay with the consequences. I didn't have much sleep last night. I have a little bit of a headache. Not feeling up to par physically, which means my filters are down. And Beth is not here to stop me. And I'm not going to look at my phone. So I'm going to lower my shields and fire some proton torpedoes. How about that, all you geeks? That's about as geeky as I'm going to get right there. Look, if we are going to choose to align ourselves with people who are walking in unrepentant sin and in rebellion, then we risk suffering the consequences that befall the rebels and the people who are walking in unrepentant sin. I'm not going to knowingly do that. But if you choose to do that, that's your choice. Because I'm not going to tell you who you can associate with. It's not my business. But if you are going to do that, and this goes for all of you out there too, if we're going to do that, then don't be shocked if I keep you at arm's length. You know why? Because I don't want a plague in my house. Right? Because that's what happened at Baal Peor. Okay? I don't want a plague in this congregation, and so I'm not going to knowingly allow that. So don't be shocked if you do those things. Don't be shocked if I keep you at arm's length. Don't be shocked if you're not asked to be on this team or participate in that. And depending on the severity of it, you just might, you don't want to be shocked when God orchestrates circumstances whereby he cuts you off. Are we rejoicing now? I don't want a plague in this camp. So Paul says, take note of these things. Don't make the same mistakes they made. Verse 9, nor let us tempt Messiah as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. They just cannot help themselves, these Israelis. They have to complain against God. They have to complain about Moses. He brought us out here to kill us and to kill our children. And our soul loathes this worthless bread, the manna, the daily bread that God gives. We don't want it. We want something else. By the way, the manna, Messiah likened himself to that manna later on. I'm the bread that your fathers ate in the wilderness. And so they're saying, we don't want him. We don't want what he is and what he represents. We want to do what we want to do. We want to say what we want to say. It's my life. I'll live it the way I want to. Well, I'm not involved with sexual immorality, and I'm not rebelling against the Messiah. I'm not, doing all of those things like they were doing. Well, let's read verse 10. Nor complain, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. And here is I don't know what the word is here. Just the tragedy of this verse to me is this. Paul is saying, don't complain lest you be destroyed by the destroyer, as they were. Meaning that the same destroyer that had to pass by their house when they were eating the Passover, the destroyer that God would not allow into their homes when they ate the Passover, but when they got out into the wilderness and they felt that God couldn't finish the job and they started complaining, that destroyer that had to pass by before was allowed to come in and to destroy them. That's what it's saying. They couldn't say no to themselves. They had to complain. They had to just let everybody know, I don't like the situation, blah, 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 blah. They couldn't help themselves. And you know what they ended up doing? Instead of behaving like Jacob, who the Bible describes as a temperate man, the word in Hebrew is tam, which is the singular form of tamim. And we all know what that word means, right? He's a temperate man. He doesn't allow his emotions to rule him. He rules over his emotions. He keeps things within the boundaries. That's what Jacob was. But they're not acting like that. They're acting more like his brother, Esau, who is impulsive. I'm hungry. Give me something to eat. Sell me your birthright. What good is it to me anyway? Give me some of your red stew. Esau's impulsive. He wants what he wants. He wants it now. And he'll give away things sacred to have what is common and profane. They're acting more like that, or at least some of them among the congregation are acting that way. So if we don't want the destroyer to come into our house, I suggest we quit complaining. I want to say that again. If we don't want the destroyer to come into our house, perhaps we should consider that we should not complain. Verse 11 and 12. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Do you believe that we're living in the end of the age? Anybody? Let me see your hands if you believe that, okay? Most everybody here. The rest of you, we'll pray. Anyway, if we believe that, then Paul is saying, all these things I'm telling you to be aware of, I'm talking to you. He's talking to us. And here's what he's saying. You don't overlook these things. In fact, he goes on to say, If you don't think I'm talking to you, you are the very person I'm talking to. Because he says, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Well, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not guilty of any of that. I'm justified in what I complain about. Well, he said, I'm talking to you. And if you're of the mind that Paul is not talking to you, because he's talking to me, he's telling me what to be aware of, and I know that there are things that I need to be aware of, that I need to be cautious about. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a little bit more detail in just a second. But he's saying, if you don't think I'm talking to you, you're the very one who needs to hear this. Because if you don't take heed, you're going to fall. So then, perhaps you've picked up on my theme for the day. Just take a guess. What do you think it is? Don't complain. Stop complaining. You're a very perceptive audience. Complaining is very unattractive, isn't it? We don't like it when our kids complain to us about stupid, petty things. We don't like it when our spouse complains to us about things that we think are unimportant or not that important. We don't like people who complain all the time. So if we don't like it when people are complaining to us, let's take that into consideration when we're seduced and tempted to complain to others. It seems to me that God doesn't care for it. Seems to me he had a lot to say about it. You know, poor Moses, he had to deal with it day in, day out, 40 years. God bless him. This man amazes me. He had to deal with it all the time. It got so bad at one point he said, God, kill me. He said it. That's not an exaggeration. He said, kill me now. I can't take it anymore. And so if God doesn't like it, Moses certainly didn't like it. He had to deal with it, but he didn't like it. Maybe we shouldn't care for it too much. And we certainly should not be guilty of it. But we are, aren't we? I am. You are. All of you guys out there, you are. At some point or the other, we're all guilty of it, right? Thankfully, he's merciful, long-suffering, forgiving. But it really helps. It really, really helps if we acknowledge that these are things that we don't need to do and that we actually make up our minds to strive with his help, led by his Spirit, guided by his word, not to do it. Unfortunately, as human beings, our attitude and our deeds, our words and our action very often say to God, what have you done for me lately? Back in the 80s, there was a song that had that title in, what have you done for me lately? And that is our attitude a lot of times because we quickly forget all the things he's already done. I've been young and now I'm old, but I have never seen the righteous forsaken or his seed begging bread. And so if I'm of that mind, then shouldn't I be confident that he's going to see me through to the end? If he's brought me this far, shouldn't I be confident he's going to take me all the way? If I'll be faithful, heed his commands, follow in the path that he has set before me. My attitude should not be to dismiss or to minimize the things that God has already done, but to keep them the forefront of my mind. Walt always likes to remind us about everybody should have a book writing those things down that God has done on our behalf. So thank you, Walt, for continually to remind us of that. And it is true. We need to be reminded of these things. We need to remember these things. We need to have the confidence to go forward based on knowing what he's already done for us. We sang about that. We celebrated that this morning. We need to live that. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking at you. I am sharing with you. I'm coming from the perspective of one who needs to be reminded of these things as well. But we struggle with that. We'll dismiss what he has done because we're focused on the here and the now. Whatever the crisis is right then and there, that's what we're focused on, and that's where the belly aching starts. We've all done it. So we'll get even more personal here, if I may. Okay, thank you. Beth and I, everybody knows that, our family has had been kind of going through some things. And I know we're not the only family. I understand that. Many, many, many people here, out there, have been going through a lot of different things. But it just got to the point that we felt that we just needed to kind of step back and focus on things that were more family centered, things that were going on in our family, health issues, other issues. And part of that, and I didn't say this to you, but part of that was, under the circumstances, to assess, are we effectively leading this congregation? To assess, can we continue to effectively lead this congregation? And to even contemplate, should we continue to lead this congregation under the circumstances? So we felt like we just needed to kind of step back and take a look at all that. And I will tell you that although we feel encouraged, and there's certain things that have happened whereby we feel like the Father has given us something to hang on to, there are some of these things that are yet unresolved. But one of the things that I've come away, at least personally, things that I knew that I need to address, things that I need to adjust, things that I need to correct in my life. I mean, he's kind of been dealing with me about a lot of things, and during this crisis, I got to see what kind of a man Bill is. Even a deeper way. Some of it I don't care for. And so we're coming back, and this is the point, coming back with, you need to expect that there will be adjustments in me. Some of them you will never notice. Some of them you will. But if we're going to do what the Father has called us to do, and that is to shepherd a congregation, not to preside over a social club. We're not the Rotary. No disrespect. We're not the Lions Club. We're not the Moose Lodge, thank God. We are a community of believers who are supposed to be striving to be holy even as He is holy. Which means that we are never or should never find ourselves in a comfortable position. It seems to me that the closer we draw to Him, it is going to increasingly become more uncomfortable to our flesh, mine, yours, all of us. And where Beth and I are concerned in the leadership of this congregation, sometimes that means that we may have to address some things and say some things we don't really want to. It'd be easier to run off. It'd be easier to run away. But He's not going to let us get away with that. All right? So if we got to be put through the mill, guess what? You're going through it with us. Okay? And so because we're not a social club, don't want to be one, anybody who is here strictly for social benefits is here for the wrong reasons. If you are here only for social benefits, you're in the wrong place. Because if the Father allows Beth and I to continue, we are going to do what I feel like He prompts us to do. And one of the things that we need to readdress is complaining. Because we've already gone through the Torah portion and we see what that renders in a congregation. It doesn't bring anything but trouble, does it? Am I right or wrong? If I'm wrong, correct me. If I'm wrong, correct me. And so then, some people are probably sitting there thinking, well, I don't know what he's talking about. Go back to sleep. Bill, why don't we do things this way? Why do you do things this way? Why don't you let that person do that? And why don't you let this person do this? And I know this is going to sound cliche, and somebody might, just like, oh, yeah, right, sure. And it's because God told me to do it this way. Or I feel like God is leading me to do this way. Or I feel like God is leading me to say to this person, will you do this? And not to that person to do that. Well, how come the rest of the disciples didn't go to the top of the Mount of Transfiguration? He only took Peter, James, and John. Well, if any of the disciples had that attitude, that's probably why He didn't take them. You understand what I'm saying here? Peter's being told by the Messiah, this is what's going to happen to you at the end of your life. You're going to be led to a place you don't want to go. And he's talking about by what death he would die. So what's Peter's response to that? What about him? And here's what Yeshua said. It's none of your business. It's none of your business. You follow me. You do what I'm asking you to do. You don't worry about him. We don't need to be worried about what the other guy is or is not doing. You need to be concerned about what the Father has asked you to do. And if he's put you in this congregation to be part of this community and the leadership of this community asks you to do this, not to do that, then do it. Don't do it. And if you have heartburn over that, we can talk, but I might still do it the same way. And some of us are just going to have to decide whether or not we can live with that. Am I okay? Yes, sir. All right. How come we do this music? How come we don't do that music? Get ready. Look, I have tastes, I have likes, I have dislikes. I'm going to go a little over today, so are y'all still hang out with me here just a minute? Okay. I have likes in music, I have dislikes. There are things that it's not my thing, but okay, I know that there are other people who like it. You know, they do some music, then I go, okay. And there's some I really like, you know. Some people like the Hebrew music. I'm one of those people, all right? Some people like the others. You know, we have a lot of different kinds of music, and it's not going to satisfy everybody's tastes. Get over it. Now, I'm going to say something very, very specific here. A few weeks ago, there was somebody online, and they made this comment when a song was being sung. I'll be back after this song is over because that song is associated with this organization. And if that person's listening, I love you, but that ticked me off. Because that is a bad attitude. And if you don't like a song, okay, you don't like it. But it is no reason to make a comment like that. It is uncalled for and is not becoming a believer of the follower and a follower of the Messiah. Hey, you know, I like, everything in minor chords and oompa, oompa, oompa and singing. I love it, okay? But not everybody's like that. Not everybody's like that. And if you don't like a song, that's fine. But don't get an attitude about it. And if you're going to take the attitude, well, because so-and-so wrote it or become from that group over there, I can't have anything to do with it. Well, then don't you ever sing Ma Tovu ever again. Because who wrote Ma Tovu? A Mesopotamian seer who wanted to destroy Israel. But the God of Israel put words in his mouth that we still sing every week. I'm just kind of reading the crowd here for just a minute. Seeing who Mike is going to have to... Never mind. We don't need to complain, folks. If we have a complaint, okay, bring it to the person who's responsible for that. The person who has authority, the person who's responsible for it. Have the courage to do that. Don't go around belly aching to other people about, I don't like this, and why don't we do that, and why can't we be allowed to do that? That stuff is poison, and it doesn't need to spread. We need to be very careful about what comes out of our mouth. We need to be very careful about what and who we're associating with if we want to be a holy, set-apart people. If you want a plague coming into your house, if you want a bad influence coming to your house, and you want to give a thumbs up to people who are posting their rebellion on Instagram, you go ahead. But I am not going to knowingly allow that to come in here. And I really, at this point, what did you say, Jerry? Don't care. That's right. I care about people, but not at the expense of all the other people. Like some of you, I am very well acquainted. Beth and I are very well acquainted of the costs to keep rebellion outside the door. It costs a lot, and it stings a lot, and it's hurtful. But one day we're going to have to stand before him and give an account for, did you stand for what was true, or did you accommodate somebody's warm fuzzies and feelings? So if you have a complaint, bring it to the person responsible for it. Sorry, visitors. This stuff's been building for a few weeks. If you have a complaint, have the courage to bring it to the person responsible for it. Don't go around to others, because if you do that, all that does is identify you as a murmurer. I don't want that to be my legacy. I don't want that to be my testimony. That's not a good thing. So, if you have a complaint, okay, take it to the person who's responsible for that. That's fine. You may not like the answer, but it's fine to bring the complaint to the person responsible for that. But if things don't go the way you like, and I mean this I don't mean this in a cynical way, but if we're not what satisfies you and what meets your needs, find the place that does. Find the place that you fit in, the place that God is calling you to be. Or maybe God's calling some of you to start something and do it that way. But if Beth and I are here and the leadership team is here and we do certain things a certain way, then you're going to have to trust within certain boundaries. I understand that, and we have to be accountable as well. We have elders that I am accountable to. We talk, they tell me what they think. We have staff members that we talk. So yes, there has to be that accountability. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, when leadership makes decisions, if you're here and going to be part of this community, you're going to have to make up your mind whether or not you trust that God has put the right person in that place. And if you don't feel that way, go find the place that has the person you do feel that way. Okay? I hope that doesn't sound arrogant. I don't know how else to put it, but the complaining and the murmuring and the bickering and the nyeh and going around talking about people behind their back. I didn't realize that was happening in Jacob's tent. We have people. Well, I want to find a place where they don't do that. Good luck. At least we're going to try to address it and call people to do what is right. Okay? So when we're tempted to complain about not getting what we want or what we think we need, we kind of come across as, okay, God, what have you done for me lately? But when we are tempted to think that, maybe we should think this. Maybe God's asking us, what have you done for me lately? How have you represented me lately to your family, to one another, to your fellow congregants? Are we humble and yet bold? Are we persistent and long-suffering? Are we caring, considerate? Are we committed? Are we faithful? Are we respectful? Do we give credit to God and we honor the Lord and His rules and His standards? And do we love one another in spite of our warts and flaws? And I don't particularly like that song. If those are the kind of characteristics that describe us, then I have confidence that at the end, when we stand before Him, we'll hear Him say, well done, good and faithful servant. But if we're not those kinds of people, what are we going to hear Him say? What have you done for me lately? So I don't want my testimony to be somebody who griped and complained about everything. And I know I have said to you many times, I go out and I gripe and complain to pine trees. That's not an exaggeration, I do. But my thinking is that at least the pine trees can't go repeat what I said. However, the one who created the pine trees is hearing all these things. And so my complaints, I try to bring directly to Him. And then I leave it to Him to set me straight. And He does. And He allows crises. He allows these things to touch my life just like He does in your life, to squeeze us and to reveal to us just the stuff that's in there that needs to be purged and overcome and dealt with. He's been doing that for a while. Same thing with my wife. She's not here to speak for herself, but I know she agrees with me. And he is, I'm sorry, there's a comment from the peanut gallery back there. She does? She agrees? Okay, all right. Anyway, the point is, folks, we want to receive everything the Father has for us in terms of blessing, but we also want to receive everything the Father has for us in terms of correction, so that we'll be better, more consistent and faithful servants of the Most High. That's what everybody wants here, right? Right? How many of you would love at the end of your life to be grouped in with nameless people and all they're known for is griping, grumbling, and complaining? Well, if you don't want to be grouped in with those people, don't act like those people. How many of us want to be grouped in with a bunch of rebels who went down into the pit alive? None of us want to be associated with that, do we? Well, if you don't want to be associated with it, get away from it. Let's truly be a set-apart people. Amen? All right, that's all I got to say about that. I hope and trust that you and everybody out there will receive this in the spirit that is intended. I'm not preaching at you. I am sharing with you. We're all in this together, and we're all called to the same standard. Amen?